Okay, so this is my first video, so don't be too rough on me, but I'm trying to convey the idea of bus mixing. And when you're bus mixing, what you're doing is you're taking individual parts that are similar and then you're grouping them so that you can listen to them together as a cohesive group. So for example, you would group the drums together so you can just listen to them, the subs, the mids and the basses, and then sound effects. And this is for a dubstep style track. And this is just some of the groupings that I've chosen to do. You could do more. You could separate the mids and the basses. You could do a separate for vocals. So then what we have going on here is we have kick and the snare. You could see those are pink. So that's going over to the basses. We have the subs going over, just one here. That's going to the sub. And then we have the mids and the basses. We have a mid and we have a bass here, and then we have an ARP. And those are going over to this track. And then the FX and textures, that's going to the sound effects bus. So you kind of want to think about stuff as a cohesive group. That way it allows you to listen to these tracks within separate buses, and that way you can get a better mix down, because instead of going and saying, okay, well, what are the kick and snare like, what's the aux percussion like, what's sub 1 like, sub 2 like, you can just go over to your bus and say, okay, well, what are the drums like as a group. And it allows you to think more big picture, which in the end, when you're dealing with a nice solid mix down, you want a nice big picture. So I'll just play a little bit. This is something I just made up real quick, so it's not groundbreaking. It's a lot of loops. And this is what it sounds like. Okay, cool. So here we just have a basic kick and snare pattern. Here's our kick, here's our snare. Aux percussion, we have basic hi-hats, open hat here, ride on ride here. Okay, so now, and then we also have a sub that's mimicking a bass here and here. Well, no, just here. This is an ARP style lead. So here's the bass, and here's that sub. Probably won't hear it unless you have headphones on. Okay, and then an ARP here. It's gonna sound like crap, but that's just because it's real quick. I just put samples together. Okay, and then some FX just to add some body to it, some excitement. And then there's the impact at the beginning. Okay, so now what I've done is I've taken all those individual elements, grouped them as you can see by color here, but then I've routed them into their buses. So now I'll explain how you do that in Ableton. So first off, I take something like a kick and the snare and I group them together. And then just call it kick and snare, and did the same thing with the aux percussion. But then I color them so I know, hey, these two buses are going to go into a drums bus. So you could see that within the kick and the snare, down here in audio 2, it's going to the group, which is right here. And same with aux percussion, these are all going to the group, which is right here. Now, in order to get these groups into the drum bus, you have to then go to the audio 2 on that group. Control G is to group something, just a quick hotkey for you. But you take that audio 2 in the drum bus, the audio 2, and you send it to the drum bus. So now, when I solo the drum bus, you're just gonna hear the kick and snare and aux percussion together. Okay, and then I did the same for the sub as well. You know, groups, sub 1's going to the group, and then the sub is going down here to the sub bus, and then same for the mids. See bass 1, bass 2, melody 2, which is an ARP, group, and then mid bass bus. And then same here, if I solo this, you can hear that. Okay, so now, as I was mentioning earlier, the advantage to this is now that we can listen to individual pieces of the track and think of them as a cohesive group, so that when we mix, we're thinking as a group instead of thinking on individual pieces of the track. So here we go. Here's that drum bus. Here's the sub bus. You probably can't hear it unless you have speakers on, headphones on. Here's the mid bass. And here's the sound effects bus. Okay, and then of course all these separate groups are now going into the mix bus. Now, the one thing I haven't talked about so far is this. I have this sidechain MIDI, which in electronic music, usually sidechain is used. And the concept of sidechaining is ducking parts of the track when a kick or a snare hit, so that the kick and the snare are prominent in the mix. So let me turn them on first. So what we have here is we just have the kick duplicating so this is a MIDI note that's going to hit every time the kick hits, and I have it twice, once for the mids and then once for the sub, and I'll tell you why later. There might be a better way to do it, but that's just how I've been doing it. And then same for the snare MIDI. There's a MIDI note that's going to trigger every single time that goes. Now I'm using a sidechain plugin called Kickstart. It's a Nicky Romero thing. There's other plugins that are more complicated, but this is just simple, and I like that. So now we're seeing that we have a MIDI 2, and I have to send the MIDI to the mid sub bass MIDI to that track that I want it to go to, and or where the sidechain is going to happen. So here we have it's going to the mid and bass for the mids here, kick subs going to the sub, and then snare. And then you also see down here it's saying, okay, so it's going to the mid and the bass, but then it's also going to that Kickstart plugin I talked about. So if we go into that mix bus and we click on sub, you can see that I have a Kickstart plugin here. So watch what happens, how I've set it up so that you should be able to see everything. No, you shouldn't be able to see it. Oops. Okay. So anyway, we could talk about that at another day, but I've pretty much just routed it to the Nicky Romero plugin, and this is the end result of that. Okay. And then here's the sidechaining without that. With without. And you know, I've started doing this more recently where I actually send sidechain notes to the whole buses instead of individual pieces. Like I could just send it to the bass or the middle, and that just gets complicated. So I figured just sidechain the bus you want to sidechain. Okay, now I'm gonna post a link to this template. If you have any questions, go down in the comments, and thanks for watching. If you have any suggestions, that would be great as well too.